What's up, family? Welcome back to the channel. Let's talk about sex. This is going to be an interesting conversation, but I've had these notes in my computer for almost 2 weeks now. So I think it's time that we have the conversation, that we have the talk about the birds and the bees. All right, no, in all seriousness, today we're going to be talking about purity culture and some of the ways that it has failed us as society. So before we jump into this, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell, check out all the ways that you can get involved or support this community, and also check out our merch because it's really, really dope. All right, so let's kind of jump into this conversation. What's very interesting, it wasn't until after I deconverted that the phrase purity culture entered into my zeitgeist, if you will. Um, Obviously, I'd been hearing the word pure and purity, for a very long time as a believer. It seems to be a very big deal. However, the messaging is often targeted more so towards young women than it is young men. The message is mentioned for sure, but it definitely seems to be targeted more so to young women, and that's not even just restricted to the church, though I do think these things are correlated, because you also saw that with MTV's obsession with teen moms, no obsession with teen dads and how hard their life would be, and of course I'm being kind of tongue in cheek here. But so I wanted to kind of broach this conversation for several reasons. Um, After hearing about it, it's definitely brought more to my attention. I think one of the most beautiful things about my life after deconversion is challenging the many things that I thought about life that were somehow rooted in or correlated with religious or social superstitions. And so often, it's not just, once you leave the theology, you don't always leave the ideology that was bred from it, if you will. And I think the purity culture, which is why I think in one sense I kind of broke away with it immediately. Like I definitely broke away from the ideas of sex before marriage, but that was kind of stuff that I had broken away from while pastoring, just kind of looking at life and things. But there's still other subtle things where the reason then why was just because, well, I no longer believe that anymore. But now, it has to be a little deeper than that. At least for me, it does. So it can't just be, well, Durante, you no longer believe this anymore. What is it that you really have a problem with about these beliefs? Now, before I jump into my notes, I want to share a quick story. I've been sexually active for a very long time. I got sexually active at a very early age, or as was common amongst my friend group, unless everybody was lying. But quite a few of them I knew wasn't lying, but those are stories for another time. Now, obviously, when I became a young minister, that was definitely something that I struggled with, and it was a significant struggle for a while until one of my early mentors, and when I say early, it's so early that he actually rarely ever gets mentioned as one of my mentors, because this statement was probably the most significant contribution he's ever had to my life. But that was well worth remembering for me. And that was, as he was finding out, because I hung out with his children, and as he was finding out that his children and myself were highly sexually active, to his dismay, I think he knew that we all knew the Bible well enough for his, because God said so speech, not to work. So he didn't try that one on us. He had a conversation with us about his life and about the fact that, he had several different children, including, his children that I, was hanging out with. Some of them were stepchildren, and one of them was a foster child. But he said he had several biological children who could not look him in the face and call him dad. And then, like, that was like, oh man, fuck all the Bible shit. That was enough right there. And so, after that, it was less of a struggle. Not saying wasn't a struggle anymore, but it was definitely less of a struggle after that. So my reasons for even trying to be sexually abstinent during those early years was grounded in very practical social reasons, not actual spiritual reasons. Even though I would cry to God anytime I messed up, I would cry and I would repent and I would fast and all of those things. All right, so let's kind of jump into this conversation. I want to talk about a few of the concepts and ideas from purity culture that are actually kind of damaging. And so let's start with the elephant in the room: no sex before marriage. Right? That's a big focus of purity culture. Now, I want to highlight some problems with this. The first problem with this type of concept of no sex before marriage, because that's often the complete sentence. The only additional that you get from that is no sex before marriage because it's God's way, or because it's the best way. But the problem with this, or at least the first problem with this, is it makes marriage about sex instead of about partnership. And see, this, again, these are one of the things that people don't talk about. But this was something that I didn't really realize until after I deconverted. That prior to believing that this stuff is bullshit, marriage had very much so been restricted in my worldview to permission to have sex. It's just the right to have sex. And so then marriage then isn't really about partnership. So then people are more inclined to preference partners of convenience based on the repressed need for sex over long-term goals and experiences, which many are robbed of even exploring, you know? And so I think that's why there are a lot of friction, or why there is rather a lot of friction in Christian marriages, coming from someone who used to have to counsel them, is because these relationships were instigated over a need for sex as opposed to a true interrogation or investigation of interest in each other and each other's life goals. So you make marriage about sex, but then there's a flip side of that too. You also make sex about marriage, right? Which on one hand means sex becomes something that you as an individual owe to someone else because of the marriage contract. I shouldn't have to highlight all of the reasons that this would be highly problematic. Sex is something you owe. Again, as someone who's had to counsel several believers, this has led to a lot of problems in a lot of marriages. And as a matter of fact, even in our legal system in this country, for the longest time, it was believed that rape couldn't exist inside of the marital relationships. You understand? Because it was this idea that sex is something that you owe to someone that you're married to. And watch this, and no one else but that person that you married to, which also, and this part isn't in my notes, but this also leads to an inclination to shame people that you're getting in relationship with who had high sexual activity or any sexual activity prior to you, because you've now made their sexual activity, even before you existed, about you, because their sexual activity belongs to you. You see how I did that? And so sex then again becomes about marriage instead of something you engage for your own experience, for your own exploration, and for your own ecstasy. And the truth of the matter is, if you're robbed of that type of experience, and if you're robbed of that type of engagement with your own sexual activity and identity, it's probably going to make it somewhat uncomfortable for you to be an involved sexual partner. And I think that is something we do have to highlight, is the damage that such repressive beliefs like this have done to marriages and to individuals altogether, by robbing them of healthy sexual exploration and engagement. All right, so that makes marriage about sex, makes sex about marriage. But then here's another one, and this is, the common one is the no sex before marriage itself. Now, it's rooted in the idea of a vengeful peaking Tom God that attaches natural sexual desires with shame, which I absolutely find this to be very interesting because very many Christians, and I'm finding even some atheists, have a huge problem with pornography. And I'm like, how do you have a problem with pornography if your God is apparently, pornography's biggest fan because he's watching everybody's sexual activity and judging them for it? If that's not a producer slash director, I don't know what is. You casted everybody in this. Okay, anyway. All right. So now, because of this shame, individuals are not less likely to engage in sex, which, as we have seen, we don't need to fight about this anymore. The data is clear here. Shaming sexual activity does not lead to people having less sex. It leads to people being less safe when they do have sex. All right. I do want to say that again. Shaming sexual activity does not lead to people doing it less. It leads to them doing it less safe. And it often leads to people either becoming the victims or the perpetrators of non consensual sex. I'd encourage you to look at the high number of people who have committed sexual assault who did so based off of repressive religious reasons, typically associated with either the shame that they themselves felt over something they did or something that happened in their past, or the shame that they felt other people should have. Okay. This also promotes unhealthy and unproven and often unproven ideologies. And the big ones here are soul ties, twin flames, and soulmates. Right? You can't go anywhere without hearing about these things anymore. And of course, it's all these things seem harmless, and I guess just that's because we've we're that generation that's been raised by this idea of Disney romanticism, with everything. And so everything is harmless and nothing is poison, even though that seems to be the opposite of the Disney stories. But you have these ideas of soul ties, which is the more negative thing, that this idea that everybody you sleep with becomes a part of you, and some people take it to the extreme of telling young women that every man that has released himself inside of you is now attached to you forever. you know you also have the ideas of twin flames, and which is also kind of like soulmates. But it's basically, again, kind of going back to this earlier idea, that this enforces this idea that you belong or are assigned to someone, you know which again is also kind of reinforces that idea that someone else owns your sexual activity or owns your sexual history, because they're your twin flame or they're your soulmate. And why didn't you wait for your soulmate? And so your soulmate, before you meet them, becomes a lot like God, somebody that you have to live your life in service to without even knowing who the fuck they are. I shouldn't have to sound the alarm of why that's not healthy. All right. But then not only that, this really does cause people to often overlook red flags in favor of signs. And so you're looking at very, very real red flags that this person is likely not a good mate for you or not a good partner for you. But you begin to say, but no, but they're a Sagittarius. And my fortune cookie said a Sagittarius is going to come into my life. And, all different types of things. And so that's really the danger of unhealthy and unproven ideologies, or promoting them anyway, is because once you do kind of promote those type of things, you're not just in order to promote those type of ideologies, you also have to promote people not verifying whether something is helpful or proven. And so you create a slippery slope where people are more likely to accept other unhealthy and unproven ideologies in other unrelated areas. Okay, so let's move on a little bit. The other one is no children before marriage, right? And this was one likely that I probably still held on to, even after deconverting. That it's probably still best to have your children within the confines of marriage. But now that I've allowed myself to explore the full fledged nuance of the complexity of life, I realize a lot of these things we had never really truthfully or genuinely engaged to be able to determine what actually is healthy or what actually isn't healthy. And so the first thing I want to call out about this one is that this one is rooted in an antiquated and often very harmful narrative. And so to kind of build up on that, one of the things that this type of mentality and ideology does is it absolutely bastardizes children socially. And I'm saying that as one of those bastardized children who's also married to one of those bastardized children, who was also raised by those bastardized children. You understand? Um, this is rooted in the antiquated idea that children have first been bastardized spiritually, which is now baked into societal responses and cultural reinforcement. Many times when I've shared my story, especially about the early years of coming up in church, I've talked to people about how people who don't come from two-parent households are often easy targets for people in the church, whether that's on the more obvious predatory sides or just are the more probably what you think are the more right predatory sides, which you see this as someone you can groom up to be in the faith and stuff like that, primarily because of love bombing. You're going to recognize that this person feels like something is wrong with them, and it just so happens that your theology supports the idea that something is wrong with them just by being born human. And it also supports the idea that because their parents did not adhere to this ritual, that there's some additional things that are wrong with them. So this church gets to reinforce the ideology while also reinforcing the person who's responsible for the ideology as the cure. All right. So, but it's actually based in scriptures. There's a scripture in the Old Testament that says that a bastard shall not enter the presence of the Lord. And so when you have a society that believes that this absolutely is the unadulterated, inerrant word of God, and that this is a God who does not change, he's the same yesterday, today, or forevermore, then families who accept that as their reality then believe that any child who is brought into the family not under the gift or the ritual of, yeah, that's the best way to say that, who have not been brought in under the incantation of wedlock, this child is somehow not blessed and will never be blessed. But of course, we've had ways to work around that to say, well, if you baptize the child, then maybe that'll work. And if you commit the child to the Lord, and all those types of things. But maybe that's why I'm an atheist today, because I'm a bastard out of Alabama, and bastards shall not enter the presence of the Lord. There you go, Christians, you got one. All right, so, but this also creates double standards, this no children before marriage thing, as only one party tends to be able to bear the visible proof of the alleged sin. And so that person tends to bear the brunt of the social displeasure. In that sense, as of now, is the woman. I saw this often in churches where if a woman is pregnant, then that definitely meant two people were involved. But the shame, the vitriol, and the maltreatment often went more so to the woman than it did to the man. And even when there was no shame, even when there was no vitriol, there was just basic policies, and we're going to do these policies in love. It was still, well, you're the one, who is pregnant, and so we can't have you on stage pregnant in front of the kids and the young adults because we don't want to platform that. But he's not pregnant, so he can still play the drums. You see, this happened quite often in churches, and it still does. But it also, and this one, I'll hit under this point, and I'll also hit under another point. It enforces a burden that the parent has often not been proven to bear, proven to be able to bear themselves. And I do find that to be unethical, and I do find that to be harmful. I mean, like, just yikes. And actually, I meant to hit that with the no sex before marriage as well, right? Because there's this idea of, the parents are telling, the next generation, hey, no sex before marriage, no sex before marriage. And in most cases, these are situations where the parents have not been able to bear that burden, in the sense that they did have sex before marriage. And so that definitely seems to be like, look, I couldn't do it, but you better, or I'm going to shame you for it. And it also, it's also being very dishonest in a very real way. Because if I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt, I could assume that you tried your very best, to follow these antiquated rules. And for you, biology, overwrote those rules and did whatever the hell it was going to do. Why would you not, why after living through that experience, and likely that experience didn't stop for you as a teenager and young adult. I've known plenty of adults, who were supposed to be abstinent and still fell into those same traps, if you will. But why would you have that lived experience and not be honest with your children about that lived experience? Why would you pass that shame down to them? So I do find that to be to be very. I find it to be unethical. That's just the best way I can say that. To shame somebody for doing something that you couldn't do, for not doing something that you also could not do. Or to even have this as an expectation, is to me absolutely damaging. And I mean, again, I I don't have to theorize here. The data is out. The data is out. We can review our crime statistics. The data is out. Um, and so yeah. So there's also this idea when dealing with the children before marriage, of that same thing, of not just the children having sex before marriage, but people having children before marriage. To give you like a real life scenario, is I knew a young lady who had children out of wedlock, and her mother and her grandmother treated it like it was a major shame. And it was like, it was something that where she really felt that she let these people down. And many, unfortunately, a lot of women go through this. And that's just really, really sad to me, because I know a lot of brothers who've gotten a lot of folk pregnant, outside of wedlock, and they didn't feel a damn thing about it, regardless if anybody had anything to say at all. But I've known, a lot of sisters, and I'm not saying that, racially, colloquially, but just women in general have had to deal with that, of people treating them like, oh, you did this is horrible, and then having to feel like, oh, I now have to do something with my life to make this up to you. And I remember counseling this particular person, and I began to ask them about, their the people they were trying to make it up to. Tell me about your mother and your grandmother. And I'm like, wait a minute, didn't your mother have both of her children out of wedlock, and then your grandmother have all of her children out of wedlock, and didn't the great grandmother also have her children out of wedlock? So like, wow, like, release that shame from yourself. Nobody in your family has won that battle, so let's just stop pretending that it even is a battle. And that's horribly disgusting to do that. If you've lived through that shame and knows what it feels like, to condemn somebody else to it is absolutely unacceptable. And these are things that we have to think about how our religious superstitions have enabled us to perpetuate cycles of shame and abuse. Okay. All right, so moving on, still in the same place about the no children before marriage. This also upholds harmful social responses as unavoidable natural outcomes. And so it becomes, children of single parent households have harder lives. Children from broken homes never recover. It becomes all of these ideas that become unavoidable natural outcomes that say, no, if you have children before marriage, this is going to be the outcome. And this is oftentimes disingenuous and based off of misinformed statistical data. While yes, there are statistics on these things, but I'd argue that the harder lives and the never recovering is more heavily correlated to the social bastardization and the constant reminder that you are somehow missing something, which will eventually become a part of the way you view yourself and your self-esteem. All right. So, and then I guess this will kind of be my last point. This idea of no children before marriage also paints marriage as a solution to parenting hardships. It is not. Nothing could be further from the truth. Having another person in the house does not automatically change or guarantee outcomes, especially when we're overlooking the obvious. And that is that children in a two-parent household tend to do relatively better in life because they had a house with two incomes or enough of one income to shield them from poverty insecurities. This is not a parenting problem. This is not a purity problem. This is a poverty problem. And it's about time that we started bringing that aspect into the conversation. This has been an interesting talk. I am so glad that you spent this little bit of time with me. And I'm really interested in hearing what your thoughts are on this subject. I'm really interested in hearing, how have you been impacted by purity culture? Man, that can be a whole conversation on its own. I know I had to wrestle with a lot of shame, uh, obviously through teenage years, just by being a young man, and then also just through my entire adult life, just dealt with a lot of shame and a lot of regret, feeling like I had done so much wrong because of a few slip ups here and there in my early years, and that I'd have to work to pay off this sexual debt to God. Wow, I mean, it just sounds so horrible. These are the things we should be thinking about when we think about how righteous and upstanding purity culture uh, has been seen as, while actually not contributing to any types of solutions. And I think that's really where we're closing at, is regardless of all the pomp and circumstance that has, been that has surrounded the idea of purity culture, we have not one evidence that any purity culture system, process, or strategy has ever worked. So it's just horrible. Again, to continue pushing these unrealistic expectations on human beings is ridiculous. All right. Thanks for your time. I love y'all so much. Thanks for hanging out with me. Of course, until next time, keep rising, stay progressive, and do your absolute best to remain as beautiful as you can. I'll holla.